everybody! In this video we're going to be talking about underpainting, specifically with acrylics. So there are tons of different types of underpainting and methods in which you can use it, but we're going to stick with the most basic. So in this case, the most basic type of underpainting is literally just starting with a wash of color over your painting surface. So why will we do this? What's the point? In this case, a lot of times there's different reasons. So some of my primary reasons for using underpainting is, number one, a white canvas can be just kind of scary. Like we don't know where to start. So to add some color to it gives us kind of a little more confidence and a willingness to want to lay other colors there. Whereas another reason could be the more scientific reason. So a lot of times when we're working with paint, we're talking about layers of color. So when we have an underpainting of a color, whatever color that might be, it can shine through the layers of subsequent paint that we put down. So that could be through glazing colors as we're painting. There could be like hints of it showing through because we didn't paint everything. And honestly, that's one of my favorite reasons. Because in that case, you know, maybe you didn't paint everything and then you have like the white of the canvas showing. That doesn't look very good. That just looks unfinished. However, if you have like a contrasting color or something that really helps your other colors pop, that can be a really excellent way of using an underpainting. So I highly recommend that. I'd say what's really trendy right now, like when I'm on social media looking at different artists, a lot of artists love to use hot pink as an underpainting. Personally, I find that one really hard to do just because that color is like hard to look at, but their results are phenomenal. I think they look really, really cool. So I think the choice of color that you use for your underpainting can definitely affect the mood of your piece all around. So back to the scientific stuff. I went on a tangent here. When we look at paint, at layers of paint, the light is going to shine down on our painting, and those little rays of light are going to bounce off of our colors that we have on our painting. However, some of those rays of light absorb into the painting. And then each subsequent layer, there's going to be just a tiny amount of reflection back at some of those different layers of paint. So we get like this just hint of richness rather than like a flat white. So those are our primary reasons for using an underpainting. For this video, we're going to stick with the most basic, which is just using a wash of color. So let's get started. All right. Before we get started, we're just going to go over some of the materials that I have right here. I just have a piece of watercolor paper. Obviously, you can paint on any painting surface that you wish. I have a piece of palette paper so you can see my colors better. Got a few different brushes, a palette knife for mixing. I think I'm just going to use flat brushes today, just feeling it. And a paper towel and some water for cleaning our brushes. And today we are going to just paint something really simple so that we can just practice the technique of underpainting. And we're just going to paint some avocados. But first we need to make the actual underpainting. So obviously this white, super scary. So I'm going to use just some red and cover this whole thing with red. Now the choice of color for your underpainting is personal. Obviously, you can use whatever color you really want to. I personally like to choose colors that contrast from the color scheme of the painting I'm going to do. Some people prefer to choose a color that complements their color scheme that's similar. Probably one of the more traditional methods would be to use brown or maybe even like gray as a base. In this case, like my primary color scheme is going to be greens and browns, so I'm choosing red because red is the complement of green. It's the opposite. So it is my hope that it will help make all of the colors pop just a little bit more than if I did it on white paper. Your wash can be really watered down and transparent if you want it to be. It can be very opaque if you want it to be. This is all really a personal preference. I would normally water this down, but I literally just forgot to grab some water and I didn't want to get up, so guess we have thick paint for our underpainting. All right, so now that we have our entire area covered, we will play our fun game of watching paint dry until we can move on to the next step. Our underpainting is dry now, so we are going to get started painting our avocados. I've gathered just a few hues to work with. We're going to work with phthalo blue, so it's a little bit more of a greenish blue, cadmium red, a little more on the orange side, cadmium yellow, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, a little warmer yellow just in case, and then black and white. So we're going to add all of those to our palette, and then we'll get started painting. To get started with our painting, we are going to just start with a quick sketch. Now I could draw this out with a pencil if I wanted. If you're a traditionalist when it comes to painting, you're most likely going to want to do it with paint. And as we are working with our painting, we are going to be using a method called alla prima. So alla prima means all at once. And basically that is just not really doing a lot of glazing or extra layers. We're just blending and painting as we go in a quick painting. So I will say this is more of a sketch. I'm just going to get some water on my brush to kind of thin this out really fast. And I'm just going to sketch out my composition of my avocados. So I just want to figure out mostly like size first. How big is it going to be? Placement. You know, avocados aren't really that hard to draw. Just kind of some ovals. And so using this watered down paint allows me to just kind of get everything really quickly on my page so that I'm ready to move on to painting. Just roughly kind of mapping out where some shadows might be. I'm not following my reference image exactly. Just kind of simplifying it a little bit just for the sake of time. Alright, so we have our quick sketch of our avocados, and now we can get started painting. Usually when I am working on a painting, I like to kind of do my middle values first and then slowly build into the darker values and then add my highlights last. So that tends to work best for me. So I'm going to just mix up some of my greens. What do I think is going to work best for the flesh of the avocado, the skin of the avocado, the pit, and we'll figure that out as we go along. As I'm going, I don't know, I'm thinking I might need to add some ultramarine blue in here. I'll see if I can just tone it down with some of this red, because I know phthalo is pretty intense. Honestly, I think I'm just going to nix this palette knife. The tip is kind of bent, so it's not really helping me mix things the way I want to. I'm going to knock this green down just a little bit with some burnt sienna. And that's feeling pretty good for me. So from here I can go in and kind of make a variation of hues as we go along. I can scrape off some of that excess paint off my brush too. Alright, so like I said, with the painting, we're going to keep this pretty loose, more of like a sketch, much more painterly than hyper-realistic. So I'm just going to start with my middle values here and just kind of block in my avocado flesh, and I'm feeling like now that it's on top of the red, the color kind of shifts a little bit, so I'm going to add a little more yellow in there. And so you can see here that as I'm working, you know, with the texture of the paper, my brush strokes kind of leave some spaces open. You can see the red through it. Now this is a personal preference if you want to keep it that way or not. And this is all going to be, like, the transparency of your paint is all going to be dependent on whether you're using a lot of water or if you have any mediums in there, the type of brush you're using. This brush is very soft, so that makes a difference. Gonna add a slightly darker hue around the edges here, where the flesh is a little more ripe. I'll go back in with my lighter hues. Perhaps I want to add maybe a little more yellow around the pit of the avocado. I'll warm it up a little with some ochre. We're gonna bump up the chroma a little bit. We'll get some really vivid greens in here. And I'm going to move on to the second avocado, just kind of get a little refresh here. So I'm going to remix some of these colors. So as I'm working now, I'm just kind of blocking in some different values that I'm seeing throughout, just being kind of playful with my marks. I'm not trying to blend too much. I want to leave some of these brush strokes showing. I did switch to a smaller brush just because I was feeling a little restricted with the size of the larger one. So as I'm working, I just want to kind of, like, I don't know, warm up some of the colors that I have going on here. Start to refine a few edges just to help differentiate those values a little bit more. And I'm finding a few of these areas are getting a little overworked. As you can see, I'm starting to lift the paint up instead of put it down, so that tells me it's time to leave that area alone. So why don't we make the pit on this side? So I'm just trying to give the edges here a little bit more value, a little shadow, and that's going to kind of help differentiate things. And then I'll go in and pop in some highlights, a little bit more of the brighter hue. The only challenging thing here is burnt sienna is pretty transparent, so we're kind of working with the underpainting really, like, shining through at this stage. So now we see that, like, really opaque white kind of taking over that transparency that we had there. And now I think we'll go ahead and mix up the dark skin around the edges. We'll drop in a few highlights here. Just to get sort of the texture of the skin a little bit. And I think maybe I want to add in a little bit more of the brown around the edges of the skin, just to give a little more differentiation between the two. All right, for a quick study, I think we're probably good here. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of fill in the background, add some shadows, and I think that's really going to tie everything together and really show you how like those hints of red peeking through can really add a lot of visual interest to your piece. So I'm going to go with just kind of some neutrals for the background, just mixing brown and blue and maybe a hint of black and white in there just to knock it down a tish. And I'm going to kind of not really fill in the space completely because I find that doing so makes it maybe just a little more interesting when we have those flecks of red kind of shining through. And from here I'll go in and add some shadows, and then I think I'll probably go back through and kind of clean up some of the edges with the skin of the avocado, add any remaining highlights. We'll probably call it good at that point. All right, so we've finished up. I've taken the tape off, cleaned everything up. As you can see with this piece, we have those nice, wonderful, warm peaks of red popping through the painting. It warms up the whole piece as opposed to kind of that cold, sterile white of the paper. So hopefully after learning about underpainting, you're able to try some on your own, see how it goes. I'd love to hear about your endeavors in the comments. Thanks for watching and keep creating.